Welcome back to another episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast. On today's episode, we have Sabine Wintner from South Africa, who was part of the KwaZulu-Natal Sharks Board. She tells us about a number of different things, but really what I love about this episode was the fascinating evolution of shark research in South Africa over the last number of decades. We talk about how she's retired now and what she's up to and what her volunteering position is doing. I just think it's a phenomenal interview, and it's something that you're going to want to check out for sure, especially if you want some advice on building a shark science career. So let's get started with the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast. I'm your co-host Andrew Lewin with my co-host Dr. David Ebert. Dave, how's it going?
It's going great, Andrew. I'm really looking forward to today's episode with Sabine Wintner. She's retired now from the KwaZulu-Natal Sharks Board. I've known Sabine. She's a very good friend. I've known her for probably longer than she cares to think about, but it's been 30 years or so. And but she was one of the real pioneers in the field, one of the real outstanding women in the field, starting back out in the early 90s. And she, like I did, she immigrated to South Africa to kind of launch her shark career. She's from Germany, and originally, and when after she got her undergraduate degree, she just went to South Africa. And back at this time, as you'll hear in the story, it wasn't like today where there's a lot of people go to South Africa and they work with different NGOs and nonprofit groups and stuff. Back then, there was no such thing. She just went there because she heard there was a lot of sharks there. So it was a very pioneering thing, just to literally get up and leave and have no idea what you're going to do until you actually get there. So it's a fascinating story, and I'm really happy she had a chance to share her story on her journey, and we'll also get caught up and hear what she's doing kind of post shark career these days, which is something that young people don't think about as much, but at some point, it's
starting to cross my mind now.
Yeah,
it's starting to cross my mind.
Yeah, at some point they're going to come up and tap you in the shoulder and say, "Okay, Dave, it's time to go." So it's like, or Andrew, it's time to go. So, anyways, I'm looking forward.
Absolutely.
I'm looking forward to this interview with her and stuff, and I hope everyone will enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. What I want people to really think about is that evolution of science in general, not just shark science, but where we've come from where we were even 40 years ago. Dave, you and I talk about this all the time, and a lot of the time we've come from different generations, and we've seen a lot of changes over that time, and we're always just flabbergasted where we're at right now compared to where we were 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And so I think it's really cool to see this just in terms of moving, and the communication back home was not as fast as it is now, and so I think it's really interesting just to see that difference, compared to now, and how much easier it is to move, even though people get homesick. Back then, you really got homesick because you didn't have a lot of communication.
I could just do a quick story.
I just think that's interesting.
Yeah, I can just tell you, when I went to South Africa, I didn't talk to my parents for 2 years. There was just
that's insane.
Yeah, so think about that.
It was by letters.
Just letters.
Letters, though.
Yeah, we wrote letters.
Letters.
You wrote letters. Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, because long distance, if it was available, was way too expensive.
Yep, it was really expensive, so you just didn't really make phone calls back then. So, and that's
crazy, right?
And that's
it's crazy
right.
To think about.
And Sabine and I left just before she arrived there, so she was in the same situation where when you left, you left, and you were just there. So when you listen to today's episode, just keep that in mind about what the times were and the difference. You just didn't have communications like you do today.
Absolutely. Well, it's going to be a lot of fun to listen to this interview. So here's the interview with Sabine Wintner. Enjoy, and we will talk to you after. Hey, Sabine, welcome to the Beyond Jaws podcast. Are you ready to talk about all things shark related?
I'm ready. Thanks for having me.
You bet.
Well, I want to welcome everybody to the Beyond Jaws podcast, where we want to wish everyone a very happy new year as we kick off 2025 here with our first episode with an absolutely awesome guest, the fabulous Sabine Wintner. Sabine worked at the KwaZulu-Natal Sharks Board for about 28 years, retiring in 2019 as the acting head of Department for Research and Development. During her career, she specialized in the age and growth of sharks, and she's the only person I know who's published on the age and growth of the whale shark and the basking shark, the two largest fish and sharks in the ocean. And she also published on the age and growth of the white shark among many other species. Sabine has 70 peer-reviewed publications to date, and she's still actively publishing as we speak now. And she also has numerous scientific reports, popular articles, and review articles that she's published throughout her career. Sabine's a member of the IUCN Shark Specialist Group and was on the organizing committee for the 6th Indo-Pacific Fish Conference back in 2001 and for the 2nd Sharks International Conference in 2014. And if you ever need anybody to organize a conference, Sabine's your person. As I mentioned, Sabine, she retired in 2019, but she's kept an extremely busy schedule, and we thought it'd be a great time to catch up with her and what she's been doing. She's also, just in her schooling background, she did a BSc in zoology at Munich University in Germany, where she's from originally, and she did an MSc at the University of Natal in South Africa. And Sabine, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, and so as we always start off with our guests is, how did you get interested in marine science and in shark field?
All right, fasten your seatbelts. So when I was, I think 6 years old or something, I watched 6 years old or something. I watched a animal program, and it said, and they interviewed somebody, and it said underneath, it said biologist. And I said to my mother, that's it, I want to become a biologist. So she was not impressed because in those days you had to learn Latin in order to study biology. And the small Latinum as opposed to the big Latinum, which the attorneys had to learn. So which meant I had to go to a different school, which was a gymnasium as opposed to a Realschule. And she didn't want that for me. So she wasn't impressed, but anyway, I ended up, I learned my Latin, and then a couple of years later, I just got so interested in sharks, and other teenagers had like Bay City rollers. I'm giving my age away now. Posters on the walls, and and I had all these shark posters on the walls. So I was very, very lucky that I actually realized my dream as a child.
But just to back up, you were born in Switzerland. Actually, you grew up in Germany, but you weren't near the ocean at all.
No. So shit happens.
and you still managed to get interested in sharks, being in where you were from, and what part of Germany? You weren't near the ocean where you grew up in Germany, right? It was Munich. Was it Munich area you grew up?
It was Munich. Yeah, I grew up in Munich. Yeah.
Okay, and so we've had a number of guests. So you ended up going. Why'd you happen to pick like University of Munich to go to do your undergraduate at?
So in Munich you can't choose. Well, in Germany in those days you couldn't choose your university. So whatever you had in matric, that you had to pass that level in order to apply for that particular biology or whatever it was. Obviously, you had to have the right courses. And then you went into a big system, and they would tell you then at which university you're studying. So you could be in Munich and you've been sent to Berlin to study there. So then there is a lottery system where people then, the other way around are in Berlin and being sent to Munich. You can then swap places. So I started in Munich, and then after my 5th semester, I wanted to go overseas to study for 1 year. And then because I could only speak English and Latin, it reduced the number of universities I could choose. So, and I could not afford, James Cook University was the one I wanted to go. And even in the early 90s, they had separate fees for, non-Australians and all that. So I couldn't afford UK, I couldn't afford America, I couldn't afford Australia, and the only English-speaking country I could afford to go to was South Africa.
Well, just back up a little. It's kind of interesting. So when you were going through your high school and stuff, you had to score certain marks in school to go to certain universities. Now, did Munich have a particularly strong program? And was it marine sciences you were looking for at that time, or was it just biology or zoology?
You do biology, and it's compulsory. It wasn't compulsory in those days. It's biology, it's zoology, botany, genetics, physical chemistry, inorganic chemistry, chemistry. So that is your foundation. And after you do your 4 diploma, after 4 semesters, then only then can you choose to go into botany, zoology, or genetics. And there was no marine component.
I was just kind of interested because most people, coming from the U.S. and I think it's probably the same in Canada, if you decide after high school you want to go marine science or something, you can kind of pick the university if you have the grades to get in. But here in Germany, you're kind of you're tracked in kind of to where you're going to go by the time you finish high school.
Yeah.
So you wanted to. So when you're finishing up your degree at Munich, you wanted to go overseas. You mentioned James Cook, and then how'd you happen to pick South Africa next as another option?
Well, that as I said, I couldn't afford any, so I didn't finish the degree. I was in my 5th semester. We normally study 10 semesters, 5 years to get our and then the equivalent to an MSc. So I was in my 5th semester, and I wanted to study 1 year in a foreign country, and I could only speak English and Latin, and I could not afford any of the other universities. So I ended up picking South Africa because it was English speaking and it was the cheapest university fees. So that was fate, call it fate.
Yeah,
made your selection easier.
Yeah.
So when you came down to South Africa, you went to. How'd you happen to? I know it's a bit in the weeds, but how'd you end up with like Durban versus Cape Town or University of Port Elizabeth or some other place?
Okay, that's also an interesting story because one of my friends went to South Africa quite often, and he was in Durban, and he offered to pop in at the university and pick up some application forms. In those days, we didn't have email, so he did inquiries on my behalf, and that's how I ended up in Durban. He brought those back, and then I'll contacted the Durban University, and yeah, as I said, they put me into the 3rd semester, and it was a bit of a mismatch. Yeah.
So you're saying, I think this is really interesting because times have changed now. I mean, I deal with people who look at careers all the time, look at graduate school, and they're emailing, different schools. So your selection was based off of not only what you can afford and what you can go from English speaking, but also where your friend went as a trip to pick up an application. Because otherwise you may have had to call and get it sent to you, but that was really what it was determined by.
Yeah,
I think that's really fascinating with just the way things have changed nowadays. They all complain, well, I sent an email, I didn't get an email back. Imagine not even being able to use email, probably not even a phone call back then. You have to have a friend who went there, grab an application, and then send it back to you. That's remarkable. But you mentioned you were doing your master's at the school, and then you switched over to your 3rd semester. So did your master's change over to Durban and then change into a PhD? Did you or how did that work?
No. So in Germany, I did the 4 diploma, which is 4 semesters. So I was in my 5th semester. I decided to study overseas for a year.
Oh, I
to increase my market value. So Durban University then thought, oh, this chick's coming from Germany. She wants to do her BSc in South Africa. We're going to put her into the 3rd semester because it's a 3-year course. And you have to be at that university for 2 years in order to get it. And then I kind of the mismatch in the level, I kind of jumped the whole system, both on the German side and the South African side, and then I went straight into an MSc because it was just not working. So I got special permission from my German university to do a MSc in a foreign country, which at the time they didn't allow. But the head of the department was English speaking, and I obviously could only do this thesis in English. So he agreed to make an exception. So they allowed me to start my MSc at the University of Natal then. And then I decided I'm going to jump the system again. I'm going to stay in South Africa, and told the German university, thank you very much for your offer, but I'm going to finish now in South Africa. So
So how,
yeah.
you talk about that as if it was, this is how it went, and it sounds very easy. But I've known like universities are not easy to do this kind of thing, especially when you're doing something new. What were your stress levels like during that time, like going back and forth with different universities? Talk about jumping the systems. Universities don't like you not like jumping systems and things like that. Was it difficult to do, like to coordinate with both universities to get that done?
Look, we're talking about 30 years ago. So
Right.
things then were not as difficult as they are now.
Ah,
So
okay.
yeah, we didn't have, it was more difficult in terms of contacting. You had to have
Yeah.
money to phone South Africa.
Right.
And obviously, I can't even remember if there were emails. I don't think so. I think it was
No.
done via phone. But it wasn't that difficult. I had to get all the German qualifications up to the stage or course proof translated into English and that kind of thing. I don't think it was a major mission. I just felt bad that I
Okay.
jerked everybody around.
You got to do what you got to do, right?
Yeah,
You got to do what you got to do.
Went down to South Africa. Originally, you were just going to go for like a year, was your plan originally, and then go back, and then of course here you are. Let's say a few years later, and
Thank you.
yeah. So so anyway, you went down there and you started. When you arrived in South Africa, had you ever even heard of like the Sharks Board at all?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, you had.
Definitely.
Oh, you had
So
heard
that
of it.
was my first, yeah. I went straight when I realized I was mismatched at the university. I went straight to the Sharks Board and asked for a job, or for an
Yes.
opportunity to help as a student.
Love it.
Did you work as did you yeah just to set so people, because a lot of the young people listening, everybody goes to South Africa now because they have all these white shark conservation groups and NGOs. People go volunteer and everything. Back in the day, it was not that way in South Africa. It was pretty much there was a Sharks Board. There was this program, Shark Research Center, where I was in Cape Town, and from a so it was just very different than it is today. It wasn't like people, like say the young people go down today. It was just a very different.
Yeah.
Plus, as Sabine was talking, you had to actually write a letter and put it in the post office and mail it there and hope it got there in time at some point in time. So when you went to the Sharks Board, did you work as a volunteer at first, or were you able to get hired on fairly quickly?
No, so they didn't have any volunteer positions. So what happened is the head of the department at the University of Natal was also the acting head of the department of the research department. So I went for an interview, and I said I would like to, work here and help out. And they needed somebody to catalog their vertebral collection. So I was hired as a Tochlehrer, and I think in those days it was R2.50 an hour. So I would not go to the classes because I've already done this stuff. And I would go to Sharks Board and just sit with these vertebrae and write down on a piece of paper the numbers and didn't have a computer. So that's how it started. And then after a year or so, they employed me as a temporary staff. And then there was like 3-year contracts, and I was on 2 or 3-year contracts, temporary, and then eventually they made me permanent.
And you got on when you went on. What was your sort of entry formal position there? Was it as a researcher, or when they first brought you on the Sharks Board?
In those days, the levels were different. It was called assistant nature conservation scientist. Mm-hmm. It was. We're talking early 90s. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I remember that era fairly well.
You've been there, yeah.
I've been there. So you got in there. Now, did you start early on when did you get going on the age and growth with the sharks there at the Sharks Board?
Yeah, so they originally wanted somebody like a student just to go and into the vaults and record what is there. So, and that's how I started. And then I obviously read up on how to age, because that was the ultimate goal. Once we knew what we had, we then wanted to age all the species we catch, because that's part of the impact assessment of the nets. If you have a species which lives 60 years and reproduces every year, 50 pups, whatever, then you're taking out 15 animals per annum is going to do nothing. Whereas if you have another species who, whatever. So that was the first thing, was to catalog. And then the second one is they wanted somebody to look at aging. And I sort of naturally got into that then. Mm-hmm. And I remember faxing Lisa once in 1996 and asking her questions with a fax.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, you, at some point, I know in there you contacted Lisa Natanson, who was on one of the first episodes we had there, as retired NOAA Fisheries, and she was kind of the age and growth person at that time. And,
yes,
and did you say you faxed it?
You faxed her? Yeah.
Yes.
Was it
I faxed her.
It was a little faster than sending an actual mail letter by letter at the time. So
it was a big thing, hey, because
it was huge.
Everything was posted, and now suddenly you stick a piece of paper on this side, and it comes out on the other side of the ocean, and another country comes, a piece of paper comes out. It was instant.
Everybody had a fax number. Every office had a fax number that you could fax to. And for those of you listeners who haven't heard of a fax before, fax machines were like the email of back in the day before we really had internet, I guess. And it was a phone number that you would call, and you could put a paper in this machine. This machine would literally fax it over, like you said, overseas, Sabine, and it would go to the next machine, and you would print it out. And it wasn't always easy to use; it didn't always work, but people used it quite a bit. Every office had a fax number and a phone number, and I thought it was it's always interesting.
It was it was revolutionary at the time, because it was just like, wow. I'd already left South Africa at that time, but it was like with almost instantly you could get something across. It was like, so you couldn't even imagine, like, wow, where can we go from here with a fax machine? Beyond a fax machine. Obviously that's changed a lot now. As we're recording as we're recording videos now for podcasts and other things.
Yeah, exactly.
And I can remember somewhere in there, after you got corresponding with Lisa, that you and I connected at some point, and we're still writing letters at that point in time for a few years, kind of in the late 90s. And I'd been home in California, and then it was just back then. That's all you do. It was fax, if you had a fax option to the fax, or just writing letters. And so so it was still like, it was several years actually before I know you and I first met in 2001 at the Indo-Pacific, but it was a number of years before even people like Lisa and others you actually got a chance to meet in person, correct? Some of the people you're corresponded with?
That was actually in 2001 then, when we had the Indo-Pacific in Durban. And that's where people are corresponded with, like Greg Collier and George Burgess and yourself. It was the first time I've met these people I've been mailing to in person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when did you actually finally meet Lisa? Because you said faxing her in 1996. When was it?
I faxed in 1990. I think I've still got the original fax, eh?
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
If I could just jump in for a second, I just say that because Sabine will literally pull up emails that I had with her from like 20-something years ago and send me these emails that I thought were long gone. I forgot about it. Just remember back in like 2002, you said this or whatever. And I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, I forgot all about that. Anyway, so I wouldn't be surprised if you have the original fax.
It's called the German gene. It's called the German gene.
Keep all files. Keep all files.
Yeah.
Love it.
So, anyway, but I knew it was quite a few years actually before you guys I know at the Indo-Pacific in 2001 you finally got to meet some people, and then I know like Lisa was years later on that. So tell us. So let's back up a little bit. When you started working at the Sharks Board there, now a lot of the sharks that you had the vertebrae from were sharks that were caught in the shark nets, which nowadays is kind of it depends on some quarters. It's a bit controversial and everything. And it's been kind of back and forth over the years, and just again, I don't know, maybe you can give a little bit of the history in the Sharks Board when it kind of came into prominence was in the early '60s, I believe, after they had their sort of I forget what they call it, like over an Easter holiday.
Black
They had
December.
like
Yeah.
Black December. Yeah, they had like
December.
what was it, like 5 or 7 attacks over a couple-day period, and that's really what kind of started the whole Sharks Board thing. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it was a Black December, and then the Easter, I think it was a total of 21 shark attacks, shark encounters now, politically correct.
Yeah.
And 7 of which I think were fatal. And that was at the time, we're talking early 60s, the tourism industry was just, everybody just left Natal, the coastline. So, and that's where and then called the Anti-Sharks Measures Board was formed in order to how can I say, help do something about this perceived problem. And they got their cue from the Australians, and they put in nets. It started off with encounters, like rigid cages. The Durban beachfront had one in the early, I can't remember, and then also lower South Coast. And now we've got a very high energy coast, so those structures didn't last long. They corroded, the waves smashed them. So eventually, the then Anti-Natal Sharks Board, whatever, they then decided to go with the same system as in New Zealand, Australia, and introduced nets. And we had huge catches when they were introduced because it was a pristine population along Durban. It started off in Durban, and then it went along the coast down south and north. And that was basically the concept of the shark nets. So you're reducing the population. Instead of having 1,000 sharks in the beach, you only got 100 sharks on the beach. So your probability of being bitten is less. And they have worked over a 50-year period.
Mm-hmm. Now, when they had just so people understand, they're listening, like the coast along Durban and in KwaZulu-Natal, there's a lot of river systems, and what you get is a lot of you get basically bull sharks, or Zambesis they call them there, coming up the rivers and stuff, and so you have these large sharks, bull sharks, coming up in areas that are bathing areas, and that's where you had a lot of the shark attacks, shark encounters. And at the times of the year, summertime, when there's a lot of activity going on, the water in a lot of those areas is not very clear, and so that had, so it was an area where you had a lot of shark activity, big shark activity, and and so
so this is why shark spotting doesn't work in our province. You know, the shark spotting program in Cape Town is very successful because they've got crystal clear water, because they've got no rivers. And they've got the bergs, the mountains, to have the vantage point to look down onto the ocean. That concept does not work in our province because of, as you mentioned, all the rivers going in there. We are as flat as anything. So shark spotting, it does not work on the Natal coast.
It's difficult, Must be really challenging.
Yeah. And the bull sharks, just so people know, that maybe not shark people, but the bull sharks tend to get more aggressive when the visibility is low. If you're in clear water with the bull sharks, they'll kind of tend to stay back. But if you get, as soon as the visibility goes down, you get this muddy, sort of murky water. That's when they tend to get really aggressive. They get really aggressive, and again, the Natal coastline there is kind of. And
also, don't forget, we had a whaling station, hey?
Yes, that was. And again, we've mentioned this before, but if you ever watch the movie, is a classic, Blue Water White Death, came out in 1971. They went to Durban to film at the whaling station there, because they would pull in these whales. They were still whaling in the 60s, and these big white sharks, oceanic white tips, would follow the whale carcasses in. And they had a little bit of history. They used to, off of the South Jetty, I think, Sabine, where they used to have the 1,000-pound club. They used to catch the big. Fishermen used to go out there and catch these white sharks off the beaches near the whaling station, and they called it the 1,000-pound club to catch these. It had to be a minimum of 1,000-pound white shark they would catch, and it's amazing how many. They used to catch quite a few sharks. This is all rod and reel, fishing off the beaches.
And on bamboo, hey, bamboo rod and reels, not graphite rods and
Right,
stuff.
right.
Yeah, bamboo.
What
Go ahead.
Bamboo.
what was the reaction of, like, having all these shark, encounters and so forth? What were the reactions of the people, that were being affected by these shark encounters and shark bites? Like, were people scared to go in the water? Even in the rivers? Like, and then was it, like you see it in Australia now, it's like they go out and kill all the big sharks. Was that the reaction of the government? Is if there was an encounter, you go and you say, okay, well, we're going to try and find this one that has a, quote unquote taste for humans?
Okay, in those days, like as I said, it affected the tourism industry, and it had financial implications for the province. So they formed this board to look into measures,
okay,
how to put, make it more safer for the bathers. So we see, Florida is different because they've always had incidents, and they never had a program like that. We had the incidents in the 60s. We built this program, and it then obviously evolved into a huge organization.
Yeah.
And the people know this for the last half a decade, well, 5 decades, and you can't. It's very difficult to play around with a system like that.
Yeah,
So
no, for sure.
Obviously they threw the dynamite in, and they tried the cages, and they did all the stuff, and then what happened then was the nets, and that was the most successful way of reducing the huge pristine number of shark populations on the coast in the early 60s.
And I think she was still there, but the person that really got the whole Sharks Board going was a person named Beulah Davis, who was really well known, and certainly in South Africa, and even globally she was known. And she was the one that really set up and got the whole Sharks Board going in the 60s. And was Beulah still there when you arrived, wasn't she?
She just retired, so I've met her. She just kind of left, and I started in 1991. But she still came in, for the Christmas, and she wrote Christmas cards for all the female staff and all that. So and kudos to her. In those days, South Africa in those days was a very chauvinistic country. And it still is. I'll be honest.
Yeah.
But for as a woman to put that off in those days, she deserves kudos. Eh?
Yeah, for sure.
I knew her a little bit. She was still there when I was still there, and then, as you mentioned, she retired shortly just after I left. And but in South Africa, it was interesting because they had Beulah Davis, who really certainly back in those days, South Africa was a very male-oriented society, and to have a woman like Beulah set up and run the Sharks Board, and she ran that baby. With an iron fist. I mean, there was no. There's some other day we'll have some other fun stories I can share there some other time. But also they had. I've mentioned Jeanette Daubry, who worked at the Oceanographic Research Institute. Yeah. Another woman. She led the shark research part in South Africa at that time from about 1959 through the 60s and into the early 70s. And with her and John Bass and Nat Kisasamy, they published some monumental works on just sharks in southern Africa. It was actually included Mozambique and Tanzania and Madagascar. But it was just revolutionary stuff. And again, you had a couple of very dynamic women in South Africa at a time when there wasn't many women anywhere globally. You had those two. You had Jeannie Clark in the United States, and it wasn't many others beyond that. I'm sure I'm missing someone, but there was not many women at that time in certainly the 60s and 70s that were kind of leading in the whole realm of shark research on everything. So I just wanted to just mention, raise that issue there. So
that's true.
Yeah. So for yourself, when you got in there and you started working on the age and growth, and I always thought it was kind of cool that you actually you had, I think, the unique experience that you did the age and growth of the whale shark, the basking shark, and the white shark, which are probably three of the most charismatic, high-profile shark species in the world. How'd that happen?
Okay, qualify here. The basking shark, eventually Lisa was the lead author on that paper. So I really, it was a very difficult long-term project trying to get these vertebrae from different museums and get them sent and then it was very difficult. And at one stage, during the data analysis, and Lisa and I have spoken often because I said, I don't understand this growth curve. How come? Is it 2 per year, 1 per year? What is happening? And eventually I said to her, listen, you run with it. And she ran with it and established that it's got nothing to do with age at all. So it's a structural thing. So the white shark was, I think, my black tip shark was for my thesis. And then I did the white shark and the whale shark because we had all these whale shark strandings. So I went to cut the vertebra out and, and then you're interested how old do they get, and you start x-raying and try different techniques. So, yeah, that's how and in between I did, the other species.
Yeah, I know you did a number of other species, like the black tip shark, Carcharodontis lumbatus, was for your MSc thesis. But the fact that you were involved in 3 very prominent shark species, I don't think anybody else can state that claim to fame with all of those.
Yeah.
Anyway, but back a little bit on the black tip shark. Just jumping over to that for a second, was that a species that you just had a lot of access to vertebrae for? Because of all the different species in vertebrae at the Sharks Board, how'd that one happen to become your MSc project?
Oh, this is a long time ago. I can't really remember, but I think it was
you're not that old.
It was also depending on our catches, So obviously, the Sharks Board wanted to know age and growth data for species which they caught commonly. So for like a great hammerhead catching for a year, we don't need to know the age and growth for them because that small catch has got no impact on the greater population in the Indian Ocean, Western Indian Ocean. So I suspect that the black tip was we had enough vertebrae. It was a species of we catch concern maybe. And then obviously went to the white shark was also in those days, 1991, it was protected in South Africa. So that was also then a reason to look at that particular animal. So that's
okay. So you still, when you were, throughout your career, you worked on the different age and growth. Did most of the common species that you guys caught in the nets, did you guys work out the age and growth for most of those during your career?
Yeah. Well, I don't think we did. Well, the reggie was then later with the bomb carbon, but so the Zambi, the tiger, the white shark. So we wanted to do the 3 potentially dangerous species on our coast. So that was, and then black tip, we did the spinner, we did the scalloped, which was also a hard catch species. And then the reggie was way back later in 2000 some. Well, in this decade, I think.
Yeah. Was there any of the ones you did the age and growth on? Were there any of them that kind of stood out? We talked about the basking shark a little bit, but were there any of the other ones that kind of stood out that kind of surprised you that you're working on?
Yeah, look, the nice thing is with the white shark, we had our first tetracycline recapture, which corroborated the ages and in that part of their lifespan, and we obviously know now that this is not just that it's changed. And then we also were very lucky. We had tetracycline recaptures for the tiger shark. So I think my most surprising one was the reggie. Also, I did not do that aging because Ken Goldman at the time, it was the only published paper on reggies. We call them reggies, sand tigers, and his maturity age was a certain age, and Jeremy Cliff had at the time he started tagging reggies up at 11 point, and those were mature pregnant females, and we started to get recaptures like 20 years later, or 20. I think the most was 28. And then I looked at this and I said, there is no way that these animals matured, that there's something not right. And then I contacted, Michelle and all them, and I said, I've got these recaptured vertebrae as well, and this age needs to be reevaluated because it cannot be, based on our recaptures, the longevity and all that.
So now you guys went through a lot of those Asian growth stuff. Did you guys, where did you during like over the course of your career, were you still doing Asian growth, or did you guys kind of start doing more tracking and doing other types of studies kind of later on in your career?
No tracking.
No tracking.
We didn't have the money for this. No, we did have a tagging program. It's just normal dot tags, which I ran as well, and only later we did get some money for pingers, but we didn't have any. I know that's very sexy and all that. We never had that. We had basic plain dot tags, and that was our tagging program, which was, we had a couple of thousand sharks tagged over a period of time, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. This might be a little. You may or may not know this, but like, there's been a lot of talk about how like the white sharks in the Western Cape have declined, and there's a lot of talk about whether it's orcas that have caused it, or some people think they've moved more to the East Coast here. During the time you were involved, did you notice any upticks in or decreases in white sharks off like the KZN coast?
Look, we catch the juveniles. We used to catch the juveniles up to 2.5, and I would lie now if I say something, but I don't think there was any decline, because I also kept tabs on the catch trends, and we would have. I don't know what it is now because I'm out of it for 5 years, but
Right.
we would have. I would have picked up something where we alarmingly suddenly don't catch. And you have to keep in mind that this is a 40-year data set, so there is a huge fluctuations. And Jeremy published a paper about El Nino and El Nino effects on the white shark catches. So if you get something going down, you're going to have to monitor it for a while before you
Yeah.
have the red flag running, because it might just be interannual variation.
Right.
Yeah. I was asked because I know a few years ago when I was there talking to some of the dive groups off KZN, they were saying they were seeing white sharks more frequently than they used to see them in prior years, and of course that coincided with people in the Western Cape saying they weren't seeing the white sharks as much there. And so I was kind of wondering if there might have been if you'd noticed any shift in terms of what was being like in cotton, where you see more white sharks caught in the net. You what?
Let's get Toby Curtis. Let's get Toby Curtis over here and check if they also got a shift like on the east coast of your continent.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah, well, we've had an office in California here where we see a lot more of the juveniles up in Central California than we ever did when I was certainly growing up. And I don't know if it's a change in the water temperature or if it's just the population is doing better. I know the marine mammal population's gone crazy out here, which I think in New England we had Megan Witten on a few months ago, and then we had Greg Scommel on, and they've seen increases in the marine mammal population. So I didn't know if there was something similar you noticed off in South Africa during the course of your career. I know. Well, back when they had the whaling station there, they certainly seemed to have no problem catching white sharks. The fishermen off the beach near the whaling station, so the white sharks knew where to find a meal. So.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so as you went along now, and you what kind of sort of research, like sort of the latter part as you guys started doing a lot of the Asian growth stuff? Where did your research focus shift at all during your career from the Asian growth to looking at other posts? Yeah.
Yeah. No, it has. Asian sharks, and Steve Brandstetter said that once to me, is the art of smoke and mirrors, and it is very labor intensive. And then what happened over the years is we got a lot of requests. As research evolved, we had a lot of requests for tissue samples. People wanted to look at pollution. People wanted to look at isotopes, genetics. They were all as research evolved. So we had a lot of requests because we catch these animals and we want to use them. and it caused quite a consternation in the lab, because Joseph from Australia sent his vials, and it was with this formalin, and he wanted that. And then Joseph from UK sent these vials, and he wanted those samples in that particular buffer. So then I decided that's it. We're going to standardize this whole thing. We're going to take everything from everything animal which comes in, and it's going to be and Demian Chapman helped me quite a bit there back in 2000, I think it was, when I met him at the AAS, from the genetics point of view, how to sample and how to store, long-term storage of these samples. And so when we get a request, we can just go and open the fridge and say, okay, which year do you want? Which species do you want? Do you want males, females, whatever? It's all sorted. It's in a database. You can pull it out. And that's then started my transition into all sorts of other things, isotopes, pollution. We did a lot of pollution stuff with Nigel Hussey's students, mercury, organo stuff. We did a lot of isotope with Nigel as well. And then I even delved in the dark science of taxonomy with a particular prominent taxonomist.
Somebody who may or may not be on this call. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I say that was actually just to kind of jump off on that a bit. We did a few years ago, Sabine and I and Peter Kine co-authored a paper on a checklist on the chondrichthyans of South Africa, which I think was an update. It hadn't been done in quite a few years, and it kind of like really laid the foundation for what species occurs in South Africa, which is important from developing like any kind of a national plan of action for any countries and stuff. And so it was kind of, for me, it was kind of cool to be able to do it South Africa and to be able to work with you and others to produce that publication. And
so one cool paper I must mention is the one where we looked at catch related to turbidity, moon phases, and temperature. And I've worked with anglers for quite a long time, and as an angler, you know tides and play a big role in catching. And I was particularly interested how these three factors affect catches, and I got in together with somebody from DAF then, and we called fins, murky waters, and temperature, what affects sharks catches in the Natal Sharks Board. And there were some really interesting trends with some species. Some caught more new moon, some caught more full moon. Some species were significant whether it was murky water or not, and temperatures played a difference with some species, not with other ones. So that was another totally different research project.
You touched on something too that we've had other guests talk about. You worked a lot with the angling community.
Yeah.
And you found out they were, and I presume how is that working with them, working with the angling community, from your experience?
Well, that was when we started the tetracycline tagging program, because when you age sharks, you obviously, in those days, in the early 90s, you had to validate verify your counts. So the only way to do that is injecting them with tetracycline, which we did do in the nets. But now we need to tell the anglers that if they catch one of those sharks with a different kind of tag, because up till then they were always yellow, so now we suddenly got an orange tag, and if you catch one of those and you gaff it badly and it dies, don't chuck it back. We need the backbone. So I went on an awareness thing. So I went on all the national rock and surf. I went on 2 international competitions held in South Africa, just to create awareness about this particular program. And then obviously you also inject the animals on the beach to supplement what you catch in the nets.
And did you find it was a pretty good? And I presume like the anglers, when they would catch something, one of these sharks that had been injected with oxytetracycline and stuff, did you end up when you guys did all the analysis, everything, were you able to provide information back to them that kind of helped that program?
Yes. Well, I mean, the guys who take that white shark, I trained some taggers then to inject on our behalf, and the guy who tagged the only worldwide white shark was one of these anglers, and he tagged it at Sunday's River, and we caught it back in our nets. So that was very historic, because I think to this day is it's the only injected white shark which was been recaptured, and you obviously got these guys got the feedback, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's really good. Do you, even though I know you've been retired, do you keep in touch with any of the anglers still at all? Do you ever hear from them at all?
No, yeah, the odd angler. Because, I mean, I stopped going to the competitions in about 2000 and what year? 2000 or something. So I went for about 10 years. So
Okay.
I'm still a friend. I've Eleanor Bullen, so she was the tagging
Yep.
officer then at Ori. So I'm still in contact with her. I visited her the other day. So, and some of the anglers are Facebook friends,
Yeah.
to
Okay.
answer your
Okay.
question.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, I just didn't know. So now since you've retired, I know you keep a pretty active schedule. You're working out at the Ushaka Aquarium there, and you're doing snakes now.
Yeah, so when I retired, I wanted to volunteer somewhere because I was bored stiff. And I started off at the Center of Rehabilitation of Wildlife, which predominantly birds. And then a friend of mine suggested to, why don't you volunteer at Osaka? And I know everybody in Osaka. I've been it then was the Ori Aquarium, so I know all the curators and the staff there, and I also knew from my time at Sharks Board, I knew the people who run the dangerous creatures section there, which is a very very good exhibition on snakes. And we do have scorpions and spiders as well, and some monitor lizards and stuff. So I wanted to do something different, and it was a standard joke that I'll arrive at Ushaka and not volunteer in the aquarium. So I volunteered with with the snakes, and I've been with them for 4 years now. So I go there once a week, maybe sometimes twice a week. I also assist with a veterinarian team. They poached me from the snake people, so I worked for them for a while. So it was cool stuff, ultrasounds on dolphins and endoscopies on dolphins
Oh
and
wow.
seal health examination. So I learned quite a bit, and obviously on the snake side, I've also learned a lot on those reptiles, and I really really enjoy working with that team.
And a lot of the snakes there are actually poisonous, right? That you work with.
Venomous,
Venomous.
not poisonous.
Venomous.
Yes,
Venomous. Sorry. Thank you.
yeah.
Correct me on that. So how's that going from the shark?
Sorry, I just realized I was on mute. Sorry.
Yes.
Let me ask you this: when you retired, did you retire for a bit where you weren't volunteering, and then you decided, no, I'm bored, like I'm going to volunteer, or did you say before you retired, no, I'm going to volunteer with this group?
Oh no, that was afterwards. I never thought of volunteering. Never.
Okay, so it was just more of like, hey, I got nothing to do. I want to do something that's a little
Well,
more
not nothing to do, but
stimulating, or
yeah, keep your mind active, keep active, learn
yeah,
some new skills, that kind of thing. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
good. I like
Yeah.
that.
So I got. I also had. No, go ahead. Go ahead, Sabine.
That you were asking a
Yeah.
question as well.
I was. Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say. Besides your snake thing, you keep pretty active. I know you're into skeet shooting, fencing, and archery. So you keep. And I know you became
Yeah.
quite an accomplished skeet shooter. Correct.
Well, not so much skeet, actually more trap and sporting. There's different
Okay.
disciplines, but I'll shoot anything as long as it's orange and moves. But so yeah, I qualified for provincial colours in 3 years, but I didn't. I choose not to accept it for a number of reasons. And I shot on 3 world championships, 2 in South Africa, 1 in America.
Wow.
Yeah, so I enjoyed. I've shot the circus for about 10 years, so I've toned down now. The archery I did for a while. And the fencing, I'm still with it, but I'm a very slow fencer. Yeah.
I think I think you're much faster than the three of us. I'll tell you that right now.
No, I'm the special needs child in the fencing class.
I was going to say, if you're going anywhere and you need security to bring with you, you got Sabine. She can shoot, fence,
handle venomous snakes.
Handle venomous snakes. Now you just need to get into mixed martial arts, and then you'll be set. You'll be top-notch security.
You can learn from Britt Finucci.
You did?
I did try. I did knife fighting. Yeah.
Knife fighting.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So you haven't lacked for adventurous things to do since you quote retired, if that's what you want to call it, with from the Sharks Board and stuff. So that's so anything. So with all your so now are you still active with at Ushaka, working in the different volunteering in the different aspects there? Yeah. And then
I did weigh a puff adder yesterday. I did catch some crocodiles, some small crocodiles. And what else did we do?
Crocodiles.
Called crocs. And I fed a monitor lizard.
Wow.
A gravid one. Yeah. So that was yesterday.
Nice. That is pretty. That's kind of cool to say that you did all that. That's pretty cool. That's just one day. That's awesome. I love it.
Definitely. Kept pretty busy. So do you have any other? What else do you have coming up that you're going to try? What's your next adventure?
Well, that's a good question. I'm fully booked. I'm quite busy.
Well, then
but I'll travel my travels.
I know you were just in Uganda and you saw the mountain gorillas a couple months ago, and I think you're going to Nepal next.
Yeah.
And
so in between.
Yeah, go ahead.
Say again.
No, so you saw the gorillas a couple months ago, and then you're in the next in whatever February. So you're going to Nepal. And what are you going to Nepal? What are you going to Nepal to look for?
Okay, so I'm going on a tiger safari because I want to see tigers in the wild. Yes, and that is in India. And then after that, India. I'm going to Nepal, and I'll do some trekking there in the most remote national park you can find in Nepal.
Because why not?
Why not?
Exactly.
Why not, right? Exactly. Yeah. So, is there anything particular you're tracking in Nepal? Is there anything in particular you're looking for? Or?
Look, any new species of animal, whether that's a mammal, a bird. Fortunately, they don't have reptiles there. So, I'm a photographer. I love animal photography. Right. So, I'm tracking there to see as little people as possible and as much wildlife as possible. And because there's so little people, I'm hoping for a snow leopard, but yeah.
Oh, they're hard to find. I heard.
I know.
Well, I'll be absolutely jealous if you see red pandas. That's one of my bucket lists.
You will be the first to see. You will be the first to get a picture of a red panda.
I'm sure I'll see it on my WhatsApp. Like, yep, there it is. Damn her.
Yes.
Damn it. So, yeah. So what? Yeah. So, well, obviously you got a lot on your plate and a lot of stuff coming up. And you've had a fabulous career. What would you, for someone coming up, starting out in the field like a young person, what advice would you have for them?
Okay. So must I say
be truthful?
Just be honest.
Be truthful.
Okay. So in my opinion, work your ass off.
Yeah.
So, and that gets noticed. So don't come with an entitlement attitude, or work hard, establish good relationships. Sometimes, and I said that to a lot of my students, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And that is important, unfortunately, but don't take no for an answer. But I'm coming from an era where I really had to compete against male, not compete, but I was in a very male and oriented environment, which is now totally different. But
But there's a lot of competition out there. It doesn't matter, male, female, any other gender. There's people are applying. They get hundreds of applications, if not more, to each job application. Right.
If I could just jump
that's why I work hard.
I can say I can attest to this, having known Sabine quite a while. Is that when she started out, she was definitely one of the female pioneers in the field, because there were just not many women in the field at all, and you really, especially being in South Africa, you really had to work to get ahead especially if you're a woman. So I just want to, really very accomplished in what you've had to do. And it's just changed a bit today, but I think the work hard ethic is still something you tell people.
So what do you, and Sabine, what do you mean by work hard? So say if you have someone who just graduates, right? And they may or may not have a lot of experience. Say they graduate from an undergraduate degree or maybe have a graduate degree. What would you mean by work hard? Is it once you get the job, work hard, or do you mean like get as many volunteerships or internships as possible to get that experience?
Yeah, so try and get as much volunteer programs. Okay, obviously some of them you have to pay, and if you get into that, then don't ride it as in, oh yeah, now I can take some sharks and suntan myself on a boat or something.
Right.
So really stand out by being a hard worker, diligent worker. Obviously you're going to have some brains and also some kind of field, physically fit and wanting to get stuck and do, because that's what people remember of these programs. Right. So if you've got 5 volunteers and one sticks out for really working hard and doing a job in no time, can think independently, it doesn't have to be the handheld undergraduate student, doesn't need the bum wiped, and then that one sticks out. And then if you then looking for 3 years later, there isn't job application, maybe as a lab helper, and that person comes in with the application, I remember that person, and that's also how I chose a certain student. Is also tenacity, So if certain people wrote to me on a regular basis, okay, can I get a volunteer job? And I said, sorry, we don't have anything at the moment. And if that person writes back 6 months later and they've got a nice CV and they've got a nice, this is what I've done, blah, 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 then I will, when something comes up, I will then choose that person over the other.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Great.
I appreciate that. That's great advice.
Yeah. Well, Sabine, it's been fabulous having you on the show today. I know it's been long overdue, and we just really enjoyed catching up with hearing your stories and stuff. And I hope you come back sometime. We'll have you back on when you got your next adventure going on. Whether it's, I don't know if it's crocodile wrestling or whatever. We'll have some reason to have you back on. And but thank you so much for coming on the program.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure and it was fun.
Thank you, Sabine, for joining us here on the Beyond Jobs podcast. Dave, what we talk about differences between when you in the 1980s and early 90s to now, and we talk about it's a completely different ballgame, not only from the technology standpoint, but from the interaction with the local community. It seems a lot different now. It seems like it's much more as part of the solution, as part of the conservation, as part of the science. I mean, just coming from your career too, you have a lot of experience with that. Yeah. What was your reaction to this? Probably I've seen that, done that, right?
Oh yeah. I could really relate, as I said in the opening intro. Sabine and I just missed each other. She literally, because we compared notes, she literally arrived a few months after I had left South Africa in the early '90s, and it was unfortunate we missed each other. It was several years before we actually connected. And of course, that was by writing letters at the time because there wasn't internet. Even in the mid '90s, it was just kind of a new thing. But yeah, she just, as we said at the outset, she just packed up, decided she wanted to do sharks. And again, there was not a lot of, you didn't have the opportunities like today. You can go down, you can hook up with some group down in South Africa and go down and play around with white sharks if you want. She just went down there and just looked around and managed to get on with the KwaZulu. Well, at the time it was the Natal Sharks Board. Now it's the KwaZulu-Natal Sharks Board. and where they do a lot of the netting. And she was she's one of the science officers there, and she had an amazing career in the different things she had done. And the other thing I hope people picked up on, she has a very diverse background. She, especially since she's retired, she's gotten into a lot of different things. She does fencing, does skeet shooting. She's works with venomous snakes, and she's just kind of an adventurer too. She just, she's out and going out and just goes on these trips and stuff, and goes on these even still now she's retired, she has more time to do that kind of stuff. So it was she's had a very amazing journey throughout her career, and if you say she still goes to American Lazo Break Society meetings, and if you happen to be there and you're a young person,
love it. Definitely
find her and have a bear with her. She won't turn you down. I'm sure she might have a glass of wine instead, but definitely. But no, she's really she's one of those. There was not when she started. There were not a lot of women in the field at the time, but she's one of those extremely accomplished women that really was ahead of her time when she came in to do shark research. And so you really want a good historical perspective of where things have gone over the last 35 years almost now since she started. She's a good one to talk to.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. No doubt. It's a lot of fun. I was really happy we got to interview her. It's not, we don't get a lot of interviews with people in South Africa, although we've been pretty good with that, but we haven't had one in a while. And so it was really great to see Sabine and hear about her career and about her advice. So it was a lot of fun. So with that said, we'll put all of her links. She's not on social media, but you can get all the information from our podcast. But Dave, if people want to get a hold of you, how would they do so?
Best way is through Instagram on Lost Shark Guy, but you can also find me on Facebook at Lost Sharks, and X Lost Shark Guy, and on LinkedIn, Dave Ebert, on all those platforms. So and by the way, please go to our YouTube channel, Beyond Jaws, and subscribe. And you catch a lot of the episodes there. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Which we've passed 500 subscribers, by the way.
Yep.
We've passed, as of this, we're at 514 or something like that last time I checked. So thank you so much for all those of you who subscribed. And if you want to see us and you want to see our guest, you can do so on YouTube. You can check it out. We'll put the link in the show notes below. We really appreciate all your support in listening to us over the last few years. We're going to continue on and bring you more shark scientists, probably bring back some of our other shark scientists that we've talked to before and conservationists, and really get going on these shark conversations, as well as career updates and seeing where people are and how they got there. So thank you very much for everybody for joining us. And Dave, of course, thank you so much. And Sabine, we really want to thank you. And from Dave and I, thank you so much. We really appreciate you listening to the Beyond Jaws podcast. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon. Happy conservation.